I'm getting emotional now talking about it. I was in hospital for almost a week. Oh, this isn't fun anymore. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're talking about my riding journey. I've seen other people do this, and I will tell you now, they probably string it together a lot better than I do. I can't tell a story, so I'm going to be up and down and left and right and all over the place. So get comfy, get yourself a drink and listen to me ramble. So I didn't grow up in a horsey family. We lived in a town, but from the age of like, I don't know where it came from, probably fresh out the womb, I was obsessed with horses. I'd beg and beg and beg my parents, but it just wasn't something that we did. So it was like, oh, go to dance lessons, go to drama class, go to tennis lessons, like anything to get me away from ponies. And I can see what they were doing now. I think I should have done tennis. That would have been, why didn't I do tennis? I didn't. I wanted to do ponies. So it took until I was 10 to actually learn to ride, and it was through some family friends of ours. They very kindly said that I could come out and ride their pony, and their daughter, she was only 16 but she was a show jumper, she would give me lessons on this 30-year-old horse pony. I'm going to say he was about 14.2, 14.3, called Welly, and he was a saint. And the poor thing, she was so patient with me. And she terrified me. I was this like timid little child. I barely spoke to anyone. I was just like in my own world all the time. I was in awe of this girl, and like just the way that she was so tough and knew how to like get these horses to sort of work with her. And I just thought it was amazing. So I was fangirling her the whole time, although I was also scared of her. She was sort of putting up with me and like teaching me how to ride. I've got some pictures that I will include. Please be kind about my pot belly. I was gonna grow. At one point my body thought it was gonna be 6 foot. Shortly after I'd started having lessons, this girl's auntie, unfortunately, she passed away very suddenly and left behind 4 ponies that needed riding and rehoming. There were like 3 tiny little ponies, like 11.2, 12.2, and then there was Duo, who was a 13.1 Welsh type I'm going to say skewbald, but she was more like palomino and white. I was riding Duo. She bucked me off all the time. I hated riding her. I persevered with her under the guidance of people that knew better than I did, and they were like, you'll be okay, you just need to put your big girl pants on and get over it. And I'd get bucked off and I'd have to get back on. I'd get bucked off and pretend I was fine, I wasn't hurt and I wasn't winded, and you know, must not crack, must be brave. I remember this fall that I had. I think I'd tacked up the pony myself, and I was cantering round the menage, and as I went round the corner my saddle just went whoop, and I'd fallen, like slipped down the side of Duo, and my head was near the fence, and I was going up the long side of the menage, and I just going, Caroline, like come and save me. And eventually I fell off at the other end, and she was like, now that is why we tighten the girth once we are on the pony. And to this day that's never happened to me twice, so it did teach me a lot. So it's been a few months, and Duo and I are actually really starting to come along. We're starting to gel a little bit, and she still hasn't found a home. I think 2 of the 4 ponies have been rehomed, and I'm riding around and I say to Caroline, I'm like, do you think that my parents might be able to buy Duo? And she said, without missing a beat, she just said, oh, we've actually found a new home for Duo. And I was like, heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken. I'm not sure what that was, sorry. Yeah, 10-year-old me, dreams shattered. And we're due to go on a family holiday in like a week's time, and I'm going to miss the ponies terribly, and I'm worried about will she be sold by the time I get back. Anyway, so we're on holiday, it's Christmas. Christmas Day comes around. In fact, I have this little suitcase of bits. Okay, let me get into character. But then at 4 o'clock we went to our parents' room, and there we opened our presents. Bit mean making us wait till the afternoon, Mum and Dad. What was that about? My favourite present was the card. Strange. It told me that I was now an owner of a gorgeous pony called Duo. I nearly fainted. This is the best bit. Then we had Christmas dinner. Like, got over that quickly. I never stopped smiling. Isn't that adorable? And I did, I never stopped smiling. And I remember we had another week to go of holiday and I just didn't want to be there. All I wanted to do was be in the miserable wet weather that I complain about all the time now, riding my pony. But honestly, I was so strange. I've kept a load of her hair. Bizarre. I was obsessed with this pony. Like, there she is in her stable rug. Let me try and find... I mean, kids today don't know how lucky they are that they can just save something to their iPhone. My brother and I had to go onto the photographer's website, screenshot all the pictures of us, and then paste them into Microsoft Word with the watermark. Isn't that nice? But that's me on her. Yeah. Minsterley Show, Stanley Park. This was Stanley Park. I remember my brother bought me this photograph and I was like, I think he'd got his first job or something and he was like, Jen, I'll buy you that. And it was like, it meant so much to me that he bought it for me. What else have we got on here? Oh, here we go. We've got some paint editing. Love you so much. Me and Duo in the field. Good gosh. Cringe fest. But I love it. Oh, here we have our number. 2231. Mine and Duo's last show. Midland Championships 2009. So, I'm getting very, very ahead of myself. So it's Christmas Day. I've just found out that Duo is mine. She's like, it's my dream come true. My whole childhood has been like made by this single moment. Oh, this is like OG when I first started out. Look at my chubby cheeks. So, Duo and I sort of learnt together, I suppose. I couldn't jump or anything when I got her. She bucked me off at every given opportunity, but we just seemed to gel overnight. Not overnight, but probably months and months of hard work and perseverance and just me gritting my teeth, getting back on and being like, this is gonna be okay, even though I was petrified. And we started going to some like clear round competitions and I'd got all suited and booted and I took it so seriously. I used to get so nervous. I remember just being so panicky about what was going to go wrong and what if this happens and what if that happens, that I could never really just relax and enjoy it. Like the bell would go and I would just be in this blind panic of, oh my god. But as we kind of got a bit more used to each other, we started doing quite well and we were like going up the levels of like unaffiliated competitions, and it would get to the point, we'd go out most weekends, I'd say, my poor parents. And I remember I'd take my parents a cup of tea and some toast in the morning and I'd be like, it's time to go. So then they'd drive me to the livery yard, would hitch the trailer up, load the pony up, and normally I'd have bathed her the day before but she'd be covered in rubbish the next morning, so we'd have to bath her again. Tack would be spotless. We'd get to the show and I'd be there all day. I'd be like, I really want to jump the 2'6", so I better jump the 2'3" and the 2 foot just to make sure that I'm definitely ready and I know what I'm doing. So this poor pony would be jumping 3, even 4 classes sometimes. And to be fair, we'd just go in and like wipe the floor with everybody. There were a couple of little pairings that it was either me or it was them, and it was like, you know, the parents get in on it as well. The parents hate each other, the riders hate each other. You're like, oh, good luck. But you don't mean good luck. You mean have a fence down, have a refusal. So we were doing very, very well unaffiliated. I was competing her up to about 3 foot, 3'3" if I was really feeling brave. And then we started to affiliate. And I think the one thing that I would say is if you are wanting to affiliate, I would do it sooner rather than later, because we left it for so long because it was like, you're not ready, which translated to, you can't do it in my head. So then when I suddenly was ready, I still didn't feel like I was good enough, and my nerves were so bad. I'd turn up to these competitions and I could barely speak, and I'd be like, oh my god. But I did a couple of like the small classes, and I remember going to the English Home Pony International, and I was walking the course with my dad, and I was like, oh my god, these are massive. And he was like, no, 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 this is just what you normally jump. And I was like, yeah, but they're massive though. Like, no, they're not. He was like, honestly, Jennifer, you jump this height all the time, you're just nervous. So I'm like, okay. So I go in, and I'm expecting to die at the first fence. I'm like, I can't do this, this is way out of my depth. And she jumps around clear, and I'm like, ooh, something's happening, like we're quite good. And then we're getting into the jump off, and I'm like doing all these turns and like going flat out, and I'm like, we could win this. But there was this one oxer that I was petrified of, absolutely petrified. This story is actually in my horse knocked my tooth out video. So there's this one oxer that I'm petrified of, and it was right off the corner, and I'm coming into it and I'm thinking, oh my god. So I'm giving it everything to get over this fence. Jumps it, lands, happy days. So I'm like off in La La Land, related distance down to the next fence, that I completely mess up because I'm not even mentally there anymore. So we have a nasty fall, and I do go into more detail in my other video, which I will link down below. So I had a nasty fall, put my tooth through my lip, which is why I have this lovely scar here. Had braces for a couple of years to fix that, and my nerves after that, I was terrified to even get on her. Like, I didn't ride, maybe only for a week, because I remember my parents' friends were like, she's got to get back on. Like, if she doesn't get back on, she never will, like, force her. So I got back on, I remember just being so rigid and like, oh my god, I'm now terrified of this pony, which is meant to be the love of my life. And I knew it wasn't her fault, but still I couldn't get past that, what had happened to us. And I felt bad for her, and I was just so scared of something going wrong again. And I didn't jump for a while, maybe only a few weeks, but it felt like forever. And then when I started jumping again, they were like poles off the floor, and then we gradually built it up. And then all of a sudden we were back up there, like doing what we did, back out winning. And then, yeah, that was kind of mine and Duo's time together. We did like really well unaffiliated. Affiliated, we had some good ones. I did win 1 or 2, but I was normally just quite happy to get round. And she was very small. If we were jumping at home and I didn't quite have my stirrups short enough, my feet would just take the poles with them. She was jumping it clear, but my legs were too long and I was just clattering through the jumps. So yeah, I think we did know it was time to sell her for a long time. But as a family, and me especially, there was no way, it was out of the question. She was going to be mine forever. Like, I adored her. She was the only pony that I'd ever really ridden. And yeah, I just didn't see it with any other pony. Didn't want another pony. Wouldn't entertain the idea. It's like, no, she's my pony, I'm going to keep her. I'm not too big. Anyway, so my 16th birthday is fast approaching, and it was the recession. My dad lost his job, unfortunately, and it was just time to sell her. So we put her up for sale. We had a few families come and look at her, and I remember there was this boy that rode her, and his dad kept calling me Duck, which I know is quite a common northern thing, but I really didn't like it. And I said to my dad, I was like, I don't want them to have my pony, like they don't get to have her. And he was like, do you know what? No, they don't. He said, I feel the same way. And then I think it was the next people that came to try her were these 2 sisters, and they ended up loving her, and they still have her now, which is roughly 10 years later. And I went to go and see Duo last year, and it was just lovely. I went to call to her from the field, as I used to when I was like a teenager, and I was like, Duo! and her ears pricked up and she looked over and she trotted over to the gate, and it was just magical. She couldn't have had a better life. She was with me for 6 years. She's been with Charlie and Gemma now for 10 years. Yeah, and Gemma was so lovely. When I went to go and see Duo, she said, you know, we still call her your pony now, especially when we first got her. It just didn't feel like she belonged to us. She's always felt like your pony. I'm getting emotional now talking about it. Oh my god, get a grip, woman. Yeah, pony of a lifetime. So the day that they picked Duo up was so difficult for me. I was just heartbroken, and she was like my best friend. We'd been through everything together. As you do when you're a teenager, everything's super dramatic, isn't it? And I didn't really promise to her, but in my head I was like, I'm never going to ride again, because it just felt like such a betrayal. This is so silly. But it just felt like such a betrayal to her that I'd sort of sworn that I wouldn't ride again. So I loaded her up into the horse box. I remember I got her to the top of the ramp and I just ran away, like bawling my eyes out. And like, it was all fine. It was all fine, and they gave me a lovely card just saying thank you so much. Like, we know she means a lot to you and we're going to take care of her. And they have. They've been so wonderful. Duo's out quite a lot nowadays. She's got a 7-year-old jockey riding her, and she's going out and winning sashes and rosettes and trophies, and it just makes me so proud of her to think that's like 4 little girls that she's just brought so much joy to their lives, and it's just wonderful to see. So Duo went to her new home. I decided that I couldn't possibly ride again, because how could I betray my pony like that? So I just sort of gave up. I'd lost my identity. I'd spent so long at school being the horsey girl and the Showjumper, and suddenly it was like, oh my god, who am I? The whole thing that I've built myself around is gone. But there's a quote that I've always liked, and it says, a horse without a rider is still a horse, but a rider without a horse is just a human. And I was like, that exactly summed up how I felt. It was like this special thing that I had was gone, and I was just me. And I spent a few years just sort of waifing around, being a bit lost. And then I did start riding again a few years later, but it wasn't meant to be, and I just didn't have the love for it that I did. Like, I was older, I had a job, I was like financing myself, and it just seemed like the payout for me to have a horse on my minimum wage job, it just didn't seem worth it to me anymore. So that was it. I'd sort of dipped my toe back into riding again, and then decided, actually, no. So a few more years went on. I think I'm like fast forward to like 21, and I went to Bolesworth International, and I was just watching all these show jumpers, and I thought, obviously it's like international show jumping, it's pretty spectacular, and I was like, oh, I'd quite like to start show jumping again, you know. And sort of it just like reignited this like fire that I just lost for so many years. And so I started the hunt for a horse, and I found this horse that I thought was going to be quite good, called Jack, and I went to go and see him, and he was this 18-year-old grade A like show jumper that would just jump 130s. I tried him, decided that he was probably a bit too old, plus he had, is it called string colt? He had something, and I was like, I don't think I want to buy him. And the lady that owned him just said, well, do you know what, we're not in a rush to sell him, why don't you just come and have lessons on him whilst you look for your horse? And so that was just the best of both worlds. And I took Jack to a couple of BSJA shows. Like, we didn't even do unaffiliated, it was straight in BS. And to be fair, he put me in my place a few times. Like, the first show I went to, he stopped, and it was like 85 centimetres. And it's just because I wasn't riding him. I didn't know how to ride properly. It'd been so long, and I'd only ever ridden a pony. So I had a few more lessons on him, a few more shows, And then I was looking on HorseQuest and this advert came up for Billy. I'll try and put his advert on the screen now. I'd been to see a couple of other horses that had turned out not to be the right ones, and they were all grey, funnily enough. So Billy's advert came up and I literally rang straight away, and it was about 10 o'clock at night, and I was like, is it a bit late? But they can always just not answer. And this lady picked up the phone and she was like, oh, I've literally only just put the advert up. That's so funny that you've called so soon. And I was like, I think he's wonderful. Can I come and try him? And she was like, well, I tell you what. She said, as you're travelling so far, why don't you come down on Saturday, ride him, and then on Sunday we'll take him to a show and you can ride him. And I was like, I've not ridden properly for years. Like, I'm having lessons now, but I'm not really show ready. And she was like, honestly, you'll be fine. Like, he will look after you. We'll go to a show. So I was like, okay. So I'd entered for a clear round on the Sunday at a venue near to them. And I went down, I drove down the 4 hours by myself, like completely by myself, didn't have a clue what I was getting into. Drove down in my little Corsa, met the lady, and I saw Billy, and I just fell in love with him. And that's a very dangerous thing to do when you're looking at horses, but I really did. And there was this boy riding him. He was only 15 at the time, and he's probably taller than I am now, but he just looked like a little boy to me. And he was jumping him over these massive, massive jumps, and he completely messed him up to this one jump, completely like stuffed it, and Billy just took off and went straight through the poles. And that was the moment that just completely sold him to me, because I was like, I'm bound to make mistakes, and if he's the type of horse that would rather break his leg than refuse a jump, that's got my name all over it. So I got on him, started cantering him round, and took him over a few jumps, and my riding was awful. And then Sue very quickly agreed with me that to take Billy to a show the next day would be a complete disaster. I wasn't ready, but I'd made the decision, like, I just wanted to have him. I loved him. So I got him vetted at the next possible slot and then picked him up. And yeah, and the day that we brought him home was just so magical. It was almost like getting duo all over again. It was like, oh my god, this is the start of something so exciting. And yeah, I've just loved him ever since I saw him. Soon after I got Billy, he injured his tendon early November. So I'd had the vet out to x-ray his tendons, make sure that everything was fine, and he just needed box rest and rehab. I can't remember what he'd done exactly, but you'll understand why it's a bit hazy for me in a minute. So he'd injured his tendon, he was out of the game for a little bit, but it was going to be fine. He'd had box rest for a week or two, and then the vet said that I needed to go out every day and just ride him down the road, walking him for 10 minutes every day. So I was getting up at like 6 o'clock in the morning, driving 20 minutes to Billy on the livery yard, taking him for a ride for 10 minutes, and then driving back and going to work. And then the one morning, I unfortunately rather thoroughly crashed my car into a brick wall, and I came off quite badly from that. So I was in hospital for almost a week, and I was unable to ride for broken spine, broken collarbone, broken shoulder, all sorts of fun things, punctured lungs. And so it was like Billy and I were sort of out of the game, both needing rehab at the same time. And I remember asking my doctor at a follow-up appointment, I was like, when can I ride again? And he was like, oh, I'd give it 6 weeks. I think I was out of hospital a couple of weeks, and I was like, today's the day, Billy. Today is the day. So I like strapped myself up into a body protector, because I was like, if anything goes wrong, this is going to be a disaster. But I just couldn't wait to get back on him. And I took him down the road, and it was like the two of us, just like frail, old, like broken people, just like trying to get back to some sort of normality together. And it was so lovely. Like, I mean, he was a bit reckless. Every time a car went past, he did this little fly buck, and I was like, my spine, I can't take this. Yeah, maybe 2 months after that, we started going out competing again. And yeah, I remember that summer, I'd gained so much confidence from, I suppose, my car accident, because I was very, very close. I don't want to be dramatic, but it was like, I could have died. I didn't, obviously, but I could have died. And it suddenly just made me feel like tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Stop holding back, like just go for it. The worst you can do is be wrong. So I sort of had this confidence of just like, fudge it, I'll give it a go. I remember I was down at the livery yard, and this is probably 2-3 months post car accident. And I was like, I just wanted to jump Billy as big as I could. I was just putting this jump up and up and up and like coming at it again, coming at it again. And I jumped him 1.55 m. And to me it was just like, oh my God. And that gave me so much confidence, because I was pretty nervous coming into it. And then every time I'd land, I'd be like, oh my God, I survived. As if by some miracle, I'm not yet dead. I'm sure there's some like deep underlying psychological issue to do with that. But let's keep this light and fluffy. So yeah, that gave me a lot of encouragement and confidence from that. And I remember that summer I sort of got to grips with competing, and I went from jumping the 85 centimetre class, and at the end of the summer I jumped my first 130, which is like an unheard of climb up the height. And I didn't set out that day to jump 130. I remember I'd gone for a 120, and I wasn't even confident jumping 120s. I just knew that Billy could do it and he wasn't going to stop. And I was sort of umming and ahhing with, shall I enter for the 130? Shall I not enter for the 130? And there was this like 12-year-old girl riding around the collecting ring. And I said, are you in this? And she was like, yeah. And I thought, I can't lose face, like a bloody 12-year-old's going to do this. I've got to do it now. So I went and entered, and I took Billy in, and we got round. I think he had 5 fences down, but honestly, I wasn't even present. I was just like, oh my gosh, to all of them. Like, he was completely by himself jumping round. So just to get 5 down was such an achievement. I remember coming out the ring, and I was like, let go of my reins, and I was just like passing him on the neck with both hands, and tears were just streaming from my eyes because I was so proud of us for like giving it a go. And anyway, it turned out that this 12-year-old was actually a bloody good rider, and she did it all the time, and it was like no skin off her nose to go and do stuff like that. So there's another lesson: don't be intimidated just because someone's younger than you. It doesn't mean they're not as good. So we're all on our own journeys. Like, don't compare yourself to others. It's not worth it. So my aim with Billy was just to jump. I wanted to jump big tracks. That was what I wanted to do. And I thought, he's the horse that's going to get me there. So we're jumping Fox Hunters quite consistently, starting to do a few 130s. And then he just gets out of control. I take him to the Halloween show at Arena UK. And he sort of jumped the first few jumps and just tanked off, and I was turning him into the next fence and he just galloped blind past it. And I remember being so cross with him, but I didn't know enough about horses to know that he just wasn't right. So I got his teeth checked, I got his back checked, everything was fine. Last resort, I took him to the vet, like took him to the vet surgery, because I was like, this horse must have something wrong with it, like psychologically or internally, there's something going on. I trotted him up for the vet, and he was like, Jenny, he's 4 out of 5 lame. I was like, no, he's not. I've been riding him all week. Like, this horse is not lame. He was like, okay, but I'm a vet and I'm telling you that he is. I was like, wow, I really am thick. Like, I didn't even notice. And he didn't feel lame, and it wasn't so much his foot pattern. It was more like there was a head bob, and that was telling the vet that he was in pain. And then we did some x-rays, we did some like, what do you call it, when you inject up the leg to find out where the pain is. Yeah, so he had all the necessary testing, and it turned out that Billy unfortunately has navicular disease or syndrome, which is a degenerative disease of the navicular bone, which just means that there's a bone in their heel, and his is deteriorating. There's nothing we can do to stop it, we can just manage it. And the danger is that it will get so rough it will puncture the bursa, and that could then become quite a problem, because then the bone could go into a tendon. So I'm like, oh my god, this horse is like, he means the world to me. It was like another duo situation. It was like, this horse is the best thing in the world. Like, he's my best friend and I've lost him. Like, I've still got him, but I'm now unable to compete him. And I remember the vet was like, no, we can just inject him. And I think this is me and my ignorance. But I said I didn't want to inject him because I didn't want him to not feel the pain. If he had done something where he was going to be in pain, I'd want to know about it so that we could fix it. I didn't want to be jumping him round and for him to, say his navicular goes into his tendon, for him to not feel it and for me to continue jumping him. Like, that would be the worst case scenario. So I said, no, he can just have time off. And I went through the whole, like, he was having remedial shoeing, he was having heart bars with gel cushions every 4 or 5 weeks, and this was costing hundreds and hundreds. And I went through like the box rest and the rehab and the bandaging and like all the supplements that I could think of. He had everything, and I just was like, he was so miserable being on box rest, so miserable. And it was heartbreaking because all he wants to do is be out jumping, and he was suddenly stuck in a stable being really bored, and he started to get a bit naughty and he was just depressed. And then I was like, I've got nothing to ride. I was now like a month or 2 down the line. I hadn't sat on a horse, and it was just so like, oh my god, Billy's going to come back and I'm not going to know what to do because I've not sat on anything. And I decided that I needed a second horse that would take over whilst Billy wasn't able to do it. I made a list that I wanted a gelding, had to be a gelding. It was going to be an older horse that had been there, done it, was going to like be an easy one for me to just take out at a weekend, do well on, like jump clear around on some like 130s, big tracks. That was it. Like, it didn't need to take over from Billy, it just needed to be like good enough. And I was sort of looking around at things, and then my friend sent me, funnily enough, it was the girl that taught me how to ride, the 16-year-old from when I was riding Welly. And she has a daughter now and a son, and she sent me this advert for a 5-year-old chestnut mare and said, what about this? I was going to buy it for my daughter, but we bought another pony instead. And I was like, well, I'm not really looking for that, but I'll go and try it and see what I think. So I drove down again by myself to like East Sussex, and I went and saw Blondie, and I sat on her, jumped her around, and I thought, yeah, she'll do. Because there was no, I didn't have much skin in the game, because my heart belonged to Billy, still does belong to Billy. I just needed a horse to like fill in the B team. So I didn't really look at it as much as I should have. I literally went down, rode her, thought she was fine. That was that. So I got her vetted, offered the dealer less money than she was up for. He eventually accepted. And then she came home and I started taking her out to competitions. I think the first 2 competitions she was good. She was like first or second. And then after that she started stopping. And I remember looking at my instructor after I'd got eliminated at one competition, and I was like, what's going on? And he said to me, he was like, Jen, you don't go into battle with nothing to fight with. He said, you've got no whip, no spurs. He said, what do you expect to happen? And I was like, but I don't want a horse I've got to ride with whips and spurs. So I tried for ages to not use a whip and spurs on her, and she just wasn't, she'd always been ridden that way. So I kind of had to adapt to wearing spurs, riding with a whip, which with Billy would be a death sentence to even show him a whip, let alone spurs. Like, I don't know what he'd do. So I've now got a horse that we've got Billy on one hand, that I've spent my entire time with him trying to get him to slow down, get under some sort of control. And now I've got Blondie, who needs whips and spurs, and she's constantly got to be hassled. Like, you've got to be on her case all the time to keep her coming forward. Like, Billy is very naturally forward going, almost too much, and Blondie was just so backwards. To give Blondie some credit, she did start doing really well around like meters, meter tens. She was perfectly happy, and she went out and she won quite a few meter tens. We won quite a big one down in Hartbury at their winter classic or winter premiere show. She won the 110. But obviously I'm used to Billy. I wanted something that I could jump the big tracks with. And she's like 7, approaching 8. And I keep like just trying to step her up that little bit. And every time I do, she spits her dummy out. And then the next show, she starts stopping. And I'm like, oh, this isn't fun anymore. Like, I just want Billy back. Blondie keeps stopping everything. We're falling out. She's such a mare to handle. Couldn't leave her tied up. Couldn't put her in the stable. She'd box walk constantly and just start kicking the door. So it's like the yard wasn't even peaceful anymore. It was just stress, stress, stress. But then she was a funny one. Like, I qualified her for the newcomers' second rounds. And I took her down to Kiso. And these were enormous fences. There was no way she should have jumped it. And loads of people got eliminated, and she jumped around the whole thing with me. We just had a foot in the water and I think a rail down, and that was it. So we ended up finishing like maybe in the top 50 or the top 60 out of like 150 starters, maybe more than that. And it was like, okay, that, and I kind of thought, she's come good, like she's going to be okay, we're going to be fine. But then the next few shows after that, she was just stopping at everything. And I remember I took her to Bolesworth International and I'd entered her for the, was it the 110 international class? But it was built tiny. It was like, I wouldn't even say it was 1.5 meters. So I was in the warm-up and she felt amazing, and I thought, we could go in and win this. This is good. And if you've been to Bolesworth, you'll know the tunnel that I'm talking about. Well, under the bridge. As I was walking her from the collecting ring to the main international arena, we went under the bridge and it was as if she just shrank into this like 12-hand pony. There's a moat around the outside of the ring, like it's very bold, and she just crumbled under the pressure. And I brought her onto the first fence and she went to stop and I like booted her. And she sort of jumped it from a standstill, came to fence 2 and just stopped. And I was like, oh, for goodness sake. Came round to it again. She jumps it. Very hairy, sticky jump at fence 3. Stops at fence 4, eliminated. And then day 2 she went in and she stopped at the first fence. And I think I got eliminated at the second fence. And after that, I mean, I took her to a couple of shows where she was literally jumping 90 centimetres and a metre at like venues that she knew so well. And she'd get round, but then every time I tried to like step her back up, it was like we just didn't have any connection. There was no bond between us. I didn't trust her, she didn't trust me, and you could see that every opportunity it showed. So I tried as much as I could for the best part of a year. I turned her away, I changed her feed, I was riding her every day, like doing lots of different things with her, having lessons, and it got to the point where it was so much work having her and I still wasn't feeling the love, and I just didn't know what to do. So I rang up my friend, so the girl who taught me on Welly and the girl who sent me Blondie's advert in the first place. She's sort of like my guru. I approach her about anything I'm not sure of with horses because she knows a lot more than I do. And I just said, what do you think I should do? I said, I'm trying everything, it's not fun. Like, I'm by myself, the only reason I ride is because I love it, but this is a nightmare. And I said, would you mind if I dropped her off with you for a couple of weeks and just see what you think? Like, ride her, see what you think. And she said, yeah, okay. And I didn't really know what I was asking of her, because in my heart I didn't want to sell Blondie, just because I'm a sucker and I love all my animals. But also I didn't want to keep her because I hated what was going on between us. So I drove her down and I dropped her off with my friend, and I had a little tear, even though I wasn't selling her. They said, well, you know, just leave her here, we'll see what we think and we'll speak in a few days. Like, just stop being emotional, like go away for a few days, calm down and we'll chat. So that's what we did. And then it turned out that my friend's daughter who's coming off ponies this year anyway, really gelled with Blondie and absolutely loved her. And they didn't tell her the full situation. They just said that Blondie was mine and she was going to ride it for me. And secretly I'd agreed with her mum that I would sell them Blondie. So they bought Blondie from me. The daughter still didn't know, and she was going to all these shows and she was like tagging me in her Instagram posts, and it was just like lovely. And they were doing so well together, like thriving together. And then for the girl's birthday, she found out that Blondie had actually been hers all that time, so she was over the moon. I was delighted because it was the best outcome for Blondie and the best outcome for me. And I'd sort of decided that me and mares, it's not a good look. Me and mares just are not compatible. But anyway, so going back, I know I do this, when I tell a story I jump timelines, but going back to when I've just driven off and left Blondie at their house, not sure what I'm asking them to do. I drive home and Billy is in the paddock beside himself. He is heartbroken. He's calling out. I can hear him from the house, like calling out for Blondie. So I'm like, I'm gonna have to go and get her back. I've got to go and get her back. But then I get a phone call from the racing yard the next day. And I'd had my eye on Mr. Jones for a while. The owners had agreed that I could have him, but then they wanted to race him again, and then I couldn't have him. So it was all kind of up in the air. I hadn't thought about him for a few weeks. Got a phone call from the racing yard saying, if you want this horse, pick it up by 12 o'clock today. I thought, it was literally the day after I dropped Blondie off. So I went and picked Mr. Jones up. I thought, if him and Billy like each other, this is perfect. If not, I've got to go and get Blondie back. I can't do this to Billy. Like, Billy is my boy. So I brought Mr. Jones home, and Billy was straight away obsessed with him, absolutely adored him. And then maybe 3 weeks later, so I got a phone call about McAlester. Would I have him? And I said, no, not really. But then I ended up having him because I'm a sucker. McAlester was having to be retired because he just wasn't staying sound in training and racing. He just wasn't coping with it physically. Whereas Mr. Jones was the opposite. Mr. Jones was very capable of winning a race. He just didn't want to. He didn't fancy it, which I can see that in his personality now. He is a bit of a princess. So I'd got hold of Mr. Jones and McAlester. I suddenly had these 2X racehorses, which I've never had anything to do with. I've never really known anything about racing or thoroughbreds. So it's been a bit of a learning curve. Mr. Jones was fit and ready to go. I sort of cracked on with him straight away. McAlester could barely walk around the field, so he had a few months where he was just in the field, like coming down and repairing. And then in the new year, I properly cracked on with both of them. Got them schooling, took them cross country, been to a few shows together. They've started doing BS, but on a ticket, because they are still very inexperienced, and I don't want to sully their records if I register them BS, because they're bound to go and like kick some fences out. But also, I know that they can do unaffiliated quite easily, so I want them to be at the BS level, but I just don't want them to have a record just yet. They're not quite good enough yet. So that's where we are. They're jumping this weekend. I'm going to do Saturday and Sunday with them at Southview in the 85cm novice. So that's that. Billy's back. This is all over the place, I'm so sorry. But whilst I had Blondie, Billy really didn't do a lot. He was in the field for a year or two, coming out every so often just to go hacking. I really didn't do a lot with him. And then when Blondie went, and Billy had had his shoes off for about a year because I pulled them off just because he was in the field. And he's come back sound. I've not had any problems with him since. I don't like to do too much work with him. I do the bare minimum, and he just comes out for a show and I keep him fit, I keep him happy, but I don't like to gallop him, and I don't like to do too much trotting on roads, and I don't like to overjump. I think we've just got to look after him. He's a bit delicate. If I keep hammering his legs, like jumping, 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 trotting on roads, galloping, 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 it's not going to do him any good. So I've just got to look after him. So yeah, that's where I am now. I've got Billy, who's show jumping around the big tracks like I always wanted him to. It's just Muggins here needs to learn how to ride a big track. And I've got McAlester and Mr. Jones, who are showing a lot of promise and potential as show jumpers and eventers. So yeah, I think going back talking about everything, like my whole riding journey, the one thing that feels prevalent is that I do just seem to what's the worst that can happen? We'll give it a go. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry that I'm such a rambly mess. Let me know if any of that felt familiar to you, or if any of it felt relatable to what you've been through or what you're going through. Yeah. Leave a comment, share the love, don't leave me stranded. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!